Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. This is Jim Garrison, and I am the president of Ubiquity University, and I want to welcome you to the 2020 trimester of our great books. This is my favorite course to teach along with Dr. Georgie Szabo, where once a month we delve into a great book. And we define a great book as a book which has endured over time or in its own time become an instant classic. A great book is a book that speaks to different people across the world and across time by addressing issues having to do ultimately with the nobility of the human spirit. And a great book, therefore, is a book that greets us as an intelligence not our own, but in a compelling way that changes lives. Books can convert, they can destroy. Books have been motivators for entire civilizations. Think of the power of the Bible or the Quran over time. So when one is dealing with a great book, one is dealing with something that is universal and yet absolutely individual. How many people do you know have gone into a motel or a hotel in different parts of the world distraught and picked up a Gideon's Bible, opened it up randomly, and been completely transformed? That's a great book. So every 2 months, we delve into a book that we consider to be great. And it is my real pleasure to comment this month and next month on a book that has probably had more influence on my life than maybe any other book. And that is The Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism by Lama Govinda. And in this regard, I want to welcome and note that the Venerable Vajra Mala, who is on the screen with Georgie, is with us this month and next month. And so thank you, Georgie, for bringing her in. She was the close disciple and confidant of Anarika Govinda for the last dozen or so years of his life, and was anointed by him to carry on his work, and now is a spiritual director of an ashram along Lake Constance in Germany. And she has graciously agreed to comment both this month and next month on the remarks that I'm going to make about a man whose perspicacity of intelligence and precision of language is quite astonishing if you take the time to read any of his works. I would recommend not only The Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, but of course The Way of the White Clouds, which is a narrative of his and his wife's journey into Tibet. He was born in 1898 in Germany. His father was German, his mother was Bolivian, and he spent some time in Bolivia. He was not particularly well as a child. He got influenza during the First World War and had to drop out, went to Capri and other islands near Italy in the Mediterranean. In 1928, he read Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer introduced him to Buddhism. And once he discovered Buddhism, he dedicated essentially the rest of his life to the pursuit of Buddhism, first in the Theravada tradition, ending up going to Sri Lanka. He found that ultimately unsuited for his temperament, particularly after he met a Tibetan guru that introduced him into the deep mysteries of Tibetan Buddhism, and that catalyzed his real mission, I would say, to both immerse himself in Tibetan Buddhism, but probably more importantly for us all, to articulate Tibetan Buddhism in a way that was both understandable to the Western mind, but also to clarify many of the misapprehensions, the superstitions, and the outright prejudices that the Western scholars had developed around Tibetan Buddhism, and really presented Tibetan Buddhism right at the moment when the Dalai Lama was coming out of Tibet into India, when Robert Thurman, who was the first American to become a Tibetan Buddhist priest, when Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and half of the 60s movement went to India. So the timing, the zeitgeist was perfect. He was the right individual at the right moment to create an exposition of one of the great wisdom traditions in world history. I will only touch the surface of this great thinker and this great tradition, but I will do what I can in this lecture before asking Vajra Mala to comment, is to just share some thoughts that I have about the great mantra of Tibetan Buddhism, the Om Mani Padme Hum, and thereby to shed some light on the magisterial grandeur of a single phrase that encompasses, really, if you think about it at its deepest level, spiritual reality in its totality. Now, that's a big statement to make, but I believe it to be true. I was introduced to the Om Mani Padme Hum when I was 7 years old. Many of you know I was born in the border, along the border of Tibet in Western Sichuan province in January 1951. And my parents were missionaries out there. They were never allowed to get into Tibet, so they stayed in a little village just the Chinese side of the border. And I was born there. The Communist Revolution was happening just previously. And it was in that area of Sichuan that the Chinese mobilized their armies in 1950 and 1951 to invade Tibet, crush Tibet, and engage in now 60, 70 years of militant deconstruction of a spiritual tradition. One of the consequences of which is that the Dalai Lama had to flee and ended up in Dharamsala. And then 1953, my family went to Taiwan because my parents knew Chinese. And one of the missionaries there, a man by the name of Dan Carr, had been with my parents to China And he would occasionally tell stories to us little kids who would gather around his knees and with rapturous attention, listen to everything that he had to say. I'll never forget the day he told the story of being in Tibet and traveling around. And he said, these Tibetans, they kept mumbling all the time. They would mumble and they would mumble and they would mumble. And I asked him, Uncle Dan, what were they mumbling? He says, I don't know. They were mumbling something like Om Mani Padme Hum. The instant he said those words, I could see the energetic structure of those words coming out of his mouth, traveling across the room and hitting me right in the third eye. And they went inside my body. I didn't know anything about a mantra. I didn't know anything what they meant, but my whole physical being started to tingle. And I knew in my little boy consciousness that I had been given a gift beyond measure. That was a tool of great price. Then, like most little boys, I instantly forgot about it. But that phrase, Om Mani Padme Hum, reverberated in my consciousness until in my 20s, I read Vajra Govinda's book, The Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, and I understood for the first time the extraordinary power of what I'd been gifted completely unconsciously by a missionary so many years before. Novalis, one of the great European mystics of the last century, has a poem in which Govinda begins his work. The invisible is tied to the invisible. The audible is tied to the inaudible. The intangible to the intangible. The thinkable to the unthinkable. And in contemplating the Om Mani Padme Hum, one is contemplating the audible in its relationship to the inaudible. And that's the power of words. That's the power of books. Books are just words. And words are perhaps the most powerful instrument human beings have. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and without the Word was nothing made that was made. Words have power. We use words every single day. Through words, humanity has shaped itself into civilization. Through words, we contemplate infinity itself. Mantras are particular kinds of words. They come from the Sanskrit man, which means to think. When you connect man with tra, mantra, you get the meaning of a tool for thinking. It's that which shapes thought. It's that which links the visible, the audible, the tangible, the thinkable, into that which is invisible, inaudible, intangible, unthinkable. So let's very briefly go into the tonality of this great mantra, which is the mantra of the Dalai Lama, as you know. It's the mantra of the great god Avalokiteshvara, the god of compassion. It is a powerful mantra that is both universal, but I think also particularly rooted in the soil and spirituality of Tibet. Om. Om is a word that is undefinable, but speaks to the consciousness that pervades all that is. It's a word that's very powerfully present in the Hindu tradition, particularly in the Upanishads. Many of the Upanishads start with Om and end with Om. And Om is one of those words which is the sound of the universe creating itself. And if you go into the way you form the sound, Om, the ah is around our waking consciousness. The Om is around our dreaming consciousness. And the is around our eternal consciousness. So that every aspect of the sound is the sound of eternity itself. And one thinks in this regards of Pythagoras. You know, it was Pythagoras that coined the term cosmos, because he said as he contemplated the sound that the planets were making, Pythagoras was so astute. He could get so quiet that he could hear the sounds of the moon. He could hear the sound of Saturn. He could hear the sound of Mars. And what he intuited was that the universe wasn't static at all. The universe was a great poem, he says, a great song. The universe is a great Om. That's what we're in. That's the sound of being. I want to read just one or two paragraphs from Govinda because his language is so brilliant about the Om. Because the Om awakens us to infinity. Om, he says, is the pathway to liberation. The interesting thing about the Om, he says, is that the Om never became the exclusive property of any particular school of thought, but remained true to its symbolical character, namely to express what is beyond words and forms, beyond limitations and classification, beyond definition and explanation. Om is the experience of the infinite within us, which may be felt as a distant aim, as a mere presentiment, a longing, or known as breaking down of limitations and bondage. There are as many infinities as there are dimensions, as many forms of liberation as there are temperaments, but all bear the same stamp. Those who suffer from bondage and confinement will experience liberation as infinite expansion. Those who suffer from darkness will experience liberation as light unbounded. Those who groan under the weight of death and transitoriness will feel it as eternity. Those who are restless will enjoy it as peace and infinite harmony. But all these terms, all the experiences of the Om, without losing their own individual character, bear the same mark: infinity. So like a mirror which reflects all forms and colors without changing its own nature, so Om reflects the shades of all temperaments and takes the shapes of all higher ideals without confining itself exclusively to any single one of them. That's the Om. And then comes Mani. What is Mani? Mani is the philosopher's stone. Mani is the Vajra, the diamond scepter. Mani speaks to the pathway of transformation. Why? Well, if everything is interconnected with everything else, and infinity is contained in every speck of the manifest world, and if everything's in a constant process of changing, that means anything can turn into anything, which is really important for spiritual progress. Because how do we change ourselves into something that's enlightened? How do we turn lead into gold? How do we turn that which is base into that which is pure? That's the spiritual quest. That's what we're all here for, is to transmute ourselves into something higher, something more true, something more good, ultimately something more beautiful. Mani is the philosopher's stone, the grain of sand in the oyster that turns it into a pearl. That turns it into a pearl. That's Mani. The paradox of the spiritual tradition is that this alchemical yearning for enlightenment, which resides in the heart of every sentient being, even in every rock, every cloud, every galaxy, all of us are part of the Om. All of us are transmuting every infinitesimal moment of every minute of every day into something else. The question is, how do we turn and make sure that the something else in which we're transmuting is along the pathway of enlightenment? And that's where the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, in my mind, speaks at a depth that I find ultimately illuminating. Because unlike the Hindu tradition, which often speaks in the Upanishads of the Atman, that the ultimate goal is for us to just melt as a drop into the ocean of the one. In Tibetan Buddhism, it's about how one's individuality refracts the infinity without losing the individuality. And that is a beautiful, beautiful notion. And I want to just read the, the way that Govinda explicates it, because it's just a beautiful, beautiful notion. This is at the heart of the Mani, the diamond scepter. Remember, a diamond and coal are made of the same chemical elements, but one is a diamond and one is only a piece of coal. How does the coal become a diamond? How does lead become gold? The Buddhist does not endeavor to dissolve his being in the infinite, to fuse his finite consciousness with the consciousness of the all, or to unite his soul with the all soul. His aim is to become conscious. This is so crucial. His aim is to become conscious of his ever-existing, indivisible, and undivided completeness. To this completeness, nothing can be added, and from it, nothing can be taken away. It may only be experienced or recognized in a more or less perfect way. The differences in the development of beings are due to the greater or lesser degree of this knowledge or experience of completeness. We don't dissolve into anything. The infinity is what dissolves into us. That's the brilliance of Tibetan Buddhism. Mani has therefore been interpreted poetically as the dewdrop in the lotus. But it is not the drop that slips into the sea, but the sea that slips into the drop. The universe becomes conscious in the individual, but not vice versa. Very interesting notion. It's the universe that becomes conscious in the individual. And it is thus in this process that completeness is achieved, in regard to which we neither can speak any more of individual nor of universe. Nassim Haramein, the great physicist, I'll touch on him next time. Selfhood, therefore, and universe are only the inside and outside of the same illusion. Isn't this rich? Selfhood and universe are only inside and outside of the same illusion. The realization of completeness has all the characteristics of universality without presuming an external cosmos, and has likewise all the characteristics of individual experience without presuming an ego entity. The idea of the realization of completeness escapes the dualistic concepts of unity and plurality, of I and not I, or whatever we may call the pairs of opposites, as long as we move on the plane of our empirical consciousness. And that's why the Mani is the philosopher's stone. If you think of a circle, the visible, the audible, the tangible, the thinkable, and you think of a circle, the invisible, the inaudible, the intangible, the unthinkable, and you bring them together and you overlap them just a little. That part of the overlap, that's the Mani. That's the philosopher's stone. That's the Vajra. It's connected with both. And the choice we make as conscious entities is whether we're going to use our energy for the mundane or use our energy to immerse the mundane into the supramundane, so that the supramundane can fill us as the sea into the drop, and we become fully enlightened beings. Which brings us to Padme. Om Mani Padme. And the Padme is the pathway of manifestation. The symbol is the lotus flower. You all know the lotus flower has its roots in the mud at the bottom of the pond. And it sends up a single shoot and then it opens when it reaches the water into a beautiful lotus. Those of you who know the story of the Buddha, his mother was on the way home, actually, to give birth to him, and she didn't make it. And she gave birth leaning against a tree. The Buddha dropped out, rather elegantly, I presume, and took 7 steps. And each step, as he stepped, a lotus blossom burst out under his feet. And then when he took his 7th step, he stopped and said to those around, "This is my last incarnation. I come to bring enlightenment to the world." There are stories of the Buddha as he gave 40 years of his life to his ministry. Sometimes his disciples would get up early in the morning and he would already be up and sitting in the middle of the pond, levitating above a lotus blossom. So once the Mani, once the philosopher's stone begins to work its mysterious potency in our thoughts and our acts and our speech, we begin this laborious alchemical process of moving from the sludge of our samsaric existence into the lotus blossom of pure thought and action and speech. We manifest that which we most essentially are. Every seed buried in the ground knows, even in the complete darkness, that its destiny is to reach the light. And no matter which way you put the seed in the soil, it's going to find its way to the light. We are all lotus blossoms in formation, because the infinity of the Om, the catalytic transformative power of the Mani, the manifestation embodied by the lotus blossom of the Padme, wants to, yearns to bring us into fulfillment. Remember the great words of Plotinus, the whole universe breathes together. St. Paul said the universe yearns, all of creation yearns with us for the redemption of humanity. That's the Padme. That's the lotus issuing out from the darkness into the inexorable majesty of the light. And that brings us to the Hum. And I'm just going to read what Govinda says because it's so beautiful. Om is the ascent toward universality. Hum is the descent of the state of universality into the depths of the human heart, the ocean condensing itself into the drop. Hum cannot be without Om, but Hum is more than Om. In the Hindu tradition, the Om is supreme. In the Buddhist tradition, Om is the beginning. Hum is the end. Because Hum is the middle way, which neither gets lost in the finite nor in the infinite, which is neither attached to the one nor to the other extreme. This is a beautiful line. I want everybody just to pause for this line. In darkness are they who worship only the world, but in greater darkness are they who worship the infinite alone. In darkness are they who worship only the world, but in greater darkness are they who worship the infinite alone. Om in its dynamic aspect is the breaking through of the individual into the super individual consciousness. It's the pathway, it's what ignites the pathway of liberation. The experience of Om must be sheltered and brought to maturity in that of the Mani, Padme, and finally the Hum. Om is like the sun, but Hum is like the soil into which the sun's rays must descend in order to awaken the dormant life. Om is the infinite, but Hum is the infinite in the finite, the eternal in the temporal, the timeless in the moment, the unconditioned in the conditioned, the formless as basis of all form, the transcendental in the ephemeral. It is the wisdom of the great mirror, the wisdom of the great mirror, which reflects the void as much as the objects and reveals the emptiness in the things as much as the things in the emptiness. That's what makes Om then the path of integration. And then finally, we therefore must have passed through the experience of Om in order to reach and to understand the still deeper experience of the Hum. This is why Om stands at the beginning and Hum at the end of the mantras. In the Om, we open ourselves. In the Hum, we give ourselves. Om is the door of knowledge. Hum is the door of the realization of this knowledge in our individual lives. Hum is a sacrificial sound. And this is the final point I want to make about Hum. Hum is symbolized in the Buddha's gesture of touching the earth. Remember when he gained enlightenment. He was sitting in the realization that he'd reached awareness, and Mara, the tempter, came to challenge that. And the Buddha simply reached his hand, his right hand down from where he was sitting and touched the earth as a witness to his enlightenment. And Govinda makes the point that what was being said there, and this is inherent in the sound Hum. Hum is breath. The Buddha was a breath-breathing human being. And this is an important aspect of Buddhism and one of the reasons why it's such an extraordinary religion. Remember Buddha's uniqueness. In contradistinction to almost every other avatar, was in not what he aggregated in his life, but that which he disaggregated. You know, if you look at most of the heroic stories, it's the, you know, you're born in poverty, you become rich, or you become a warrior, or you become this, and you spend most of your life striving to attain the things that'll make you happy. That's where the Buddha started. He was rich. He was the son of the king. He was beautiful. He was physically extraordinary. At age 16, he was married to the most beautiful woman in the land. He tells of the fact that he had several palaces, and in the palaces there were ponds of blue lotuses and pink lotuses and white lotuses and female attendants that catered to his every whim. He gave it all away. He walked out because he realized that wasn't what was ultimately true. And the night he left the palace, on his horse with his attendants, he got to the edge of the forest, cut his hair, took off his clothes, gave the horse, walked into the forest in the dark of night, completely naked. Went through years of austerities, years of yogic practices, emaciating himself, till finally he said he could take his hand, press it against his stomach, and wrap his hand around his spine. Think about that before your next meal. And that wasn't enough. The extraordinary power of the Buddha is that he gave it all away until he was simply, as Rumi says, a breath-breathing human being beyond materiality, beyond ideology, beyond asceticism, breathing. And that's where all of us need to be today. Beyond sectarianism, beyond religions, beyond dogma, and simply accept the reality that we're creatures of Mother Earth, created by her for a purpose we have yet to discover. But it is initiated through the realization, and this is why the hum is so powerful and why it ends the mantra. It's the sound of prana. It's the sound of breathing. It's the sound of motion as the infinity that we have inculcated in ourselves as the Om through the catalytic power of the Mani, and as the Padma, as the lotus blossom of who we are becomes what we were destined to be, creatures of light, breathes this truth, lives this truth of compassion, of integrity, of transparent manifestation and integration of all that is good and true and beautiful into the world. Om Mani Padme Hum. Well, thank you, everyone. As you can see, I feel all this quite deeply, having contemplated these matters for many years. I would like to now turn it over to the Venerable Vajra Mala, and would love to have any of your comments that you would like to make on the few remarks that I've made about this great mantra. I realize that I've only touched the outside of these great truths, and welcome any remarks that you would like to make.
So thank you very much for your inspiring talk. It was according to Lama Govinda's wish, because he always told us you should not instruct or teach people, but you should inspire them. And I think you succeeded exactly to inspire the listeners. Thank you very much for this great talk.
Thank you.
I also think you didn't only touch the surface, but you showed very convincingly how the students should read this book. Not in an intellectual way, not in a scholarly way, but in a way where you relax and contemplate on each and every sentence, on each and every paragraph. And I doubt that you can do that within a few weeks or months. And when you told me that you read this book every year anew, then I was very happy, because it is the same what I'm doing again and again. And the year 1951 seems to be a very magical year, because in 1951, I met Lama Govinda's teachings for the first time in a very small German journal, where his articles were published before this book appeared in the bookshops long ago. And I was so fascinated by these articles that I was continuing searching for similar books and similar information about Buddhism, about Tibet, and felt very close to this ancient Tibetan culture. You spoke so vividly and so touching. No, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I think I would certainly be interested in, I know the students would be interested to hear of your experience with Govinda, you know, how you met him, the time that you spent with him, how you found him as an individual, how you found him as a teacher, anything that you could share with us of your experience of the Lama would, I think, be very elucidating for us.
I met him only in 1972 in person, when he had a lecture in Frankfurt in Germany about the heritage of Tibet. And after this lecture, there was an article in the newspapers, and in this article he was named as the last fairy tale teller of the world, because the whole assembly of guests there were so fascinated that you would have heard a needle to drop on the floor. Nobody was moving for 2 hours, nobody spoke, everybody was listening, eyes open, and it was really very great. But when I met him later, when he visited Germany or also in America, in Mill Valley, in California, it was always very personal encounter with a noble, very pious, very humble, yet diligent and wise old man. So he was able to open the hearts of the people by his generosity in sharing his time, sharing his wisdom, giving attention to everybody, whether it was an important person, a learned person, or just a simple young girl as I have been at that time. So he didn't make any difference. He didn't judge the people who visited him. He was curious, he was interested in what other people thought and told. So interested that it also happened that some of the visitors told stories about themselves and didn't come to the point to ask him important questions. And when I listened now to your lecture, I was very much impressed that it seemed to me as if you would have met him also in America when he lived there or taught there, but I know that you didn't. But you really spoke in his spirit. And that was a very good experience for me now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you must have been quite close to him for him to have asked you to carry on the tradition. And didn't he, I don't know what the right word is, anoint you or deputize you to establish some centers in Germany?
Yeah.
You were part of his attempt to establish his lineage.
So,
right?
see, his lineage was already established.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he founded this orders community in 1933 in India, together with many famous Indian scholars. So famous names: Bhattacharya, Barua, Stella Kramrisch, an immigrant from Germany. And due to the independence movement, this orders community never became very important in India. But in 1952, there was a change because German and Hungarian students visited him and founded centers in Germany and in Hungary. So when he told me to continue his teachings in 1984 to keep alive this tradition of an open mind, of an humble attitude, of an attitude that is open to all the wisdoms of this world and is not restricted to a single Buddhist tradition. I was a little bit hopeless, and I didn't know how to fulfill this wish because I started my career, so to say, as his driver, as his attendant. I had to cook the tea, I had to go shopping with him, and so on. And I was always present when he received visitors. So I was listening to the talks he gave very privately, to interviews, to consultations, and so on. And so I had the possibility to be a witness to even very private talks and informations and teachings. It probably was some karmic relation between us. And perhaps he also trusted me because I was grown up as a Buddhist child already by my mother, who was a very faithful Buddhist already in the 1920s.
In Germany?
In Germany, yes.
That must have been quite rare.
It was quite rare. I'm one of the very few persons of my generation who grew up as a Buddhist child. But I have studied Theravada Buddhism when I was a child. And in my teenager years, I studied Zen, Chan, and also Taoism. I was very much fascinated by that. But always my main interest was in the Tibetan tradition. So the history and the philosophy, in the culture, in the language, and so on. So when I discovered the books and recognized that I already have heard or read about these wisdom long ago as a child, I was so happy that I simply followed his footsteps from that time on, and met him in Germany whenever he was there for a few months to recover from his travels. And I had simply the chance to be together with him in a very informal way also. And I'm very grateful for that.
I bet. Well, you know, the point that you're making about his deep tolerance is really an important one. It was one of the things that I found so attractive about him. Like I was reading about the Om. You know, there's no one way to understand it. It is like a great mirror. There's many dimensions as you're in. The Om will be present in a way that's both universal and specific to you. And often in the course of the book, he'll be talking about the chakras, or he'll be talking about Tantra, or he'll be talking about, you know, the various channels in the body and the sounds. And then he'll just say, but it may not be this way. You may want to do it a different way. And the central point that he makes about the mantras, which is worth just noting, and I'd love your comment on, is that the mantras in and of themselves are empty shells. What empowers them is the integrity, the devotion, and the commitment of the seeker. And so we, you know, in the mystical tradition, we say that every year when we gather in our mystery school in Chartres in France, is that in the end, what you take is equal to the love you make. You know, it's like the Beatles say at the end of Abbey Road, the love you take is equal to the love you make. You're going to get as much out of this experience as you put in. And it may be one way, it may be another way, but it's your devotion and integrity of commitment that really brings the mantric power alive and makes it an instrument of transformation. Would you agree with that? Anything you would add to that concept?
Yes, absolutely. So I was a little bit afraid when you recommended this book to your students, because it is not a book which you should read out of curiosity or by intellectual interest, but it is a book which will really transform your life, and it will really transform your mind, and perhaps even it will transform your whole life. But for that, it is a book which has to be read with commitment and with passion, even with passion, to search for the deeper and deeper understanding of the words, or of the wisdom behind the words. And therefore, just to read it is not enough. And many people, or not, some people criticize Lama Govinda because he also integrated in his book certain ideas of Hindu yoga. For example, the illustrations in his books on the chakras are taken from Avalon's books on the chakra system, on the Hindu or yoga chakra system, and is not in detail the same as in Buddhist yoga.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think all these systems have different purposes and can be used for different exercises. It depends upon the aim which you want to reach by that.
Yeah. And as I indicated at the beginning, next month I'm going to be going more deeply into Tantra, which is really at the heart of the Padme, the immersion of the lotus blossom from the mud at the bottom, and the hum, which is really tied to the chakras. And there's very interesting differences between the Tibetan Buddhist and the Hindu traditions around both tantra and chakras and the body, and whether the drop melts back into the ocean or the ocean melts into the drop, and the implications, which I want to really explore, of free will. So well, we're going to save those aspects for next month. And Georgie, I'd love to hear from you in a minute, but just before opening it up more broadly to the students, I would love to just ask you how this mantra has shaped your spirituality, how you use it in your community. Is it a central aspect? Is it something that is more on the margins? I mean, how has the Om Mani Padme Hum played a role in your spiritual life?
This mantra is sort of the basis of all the, or most tantric systems, because it shows the 5 wisdoms of the 5 Tathagatas, and it is a perfect approach to all the other tantric systems, which we can study later. So the book is, so to say, the key to the whole tantric system. But I think nowadays the compassion of the Buddha Avalokiteshvara is one of the most needed qualities for mankind. And therefore it should be practiced together with an attitude where the vision of a compassionate and loving community and the presence of the Buddhas who bless us and who support us on this quest for peace, for love, for compassion, for impartiality, and for joy, can really change our attitude towards ourselves and also towards other sentient beings, not limited to the human, to humanity, but also to the nature, to the animals. So I think without this starting point to develop this deep compassion within our hearts, we shouldn't enter the Buddhist path, because we can't liberate ourselves and being separate from all the others. There must be a connection between the individual and all the other sentient beings. So the connection between the individual, as you showed it very nicely, with the universe. And I think the many troubles in the world nowadays are based on this separation between the individual and the world, the inner world and the outer world. And these both worlds have to merge. And this mantra can help us to merge them within us.
Yes, beautifully put. Beautifully put. Georgie, do you have any comment? And then I'd like to see all our students raise their hands and get in line here.
You can share the place.
So that we can carry forward this discussion. So I want the students to kind of stand forth here. But first, Dr. Szabo.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Well, thank you very much for your wonderful, passionate presentation. And the way you convey this book is like, it just sank to my heart and soul. But I'm most grateful not just to yourself and Lama Govinda, but that Vajra Mala was able to come and be part of this conversation. And I'm so happy that she's in my flat, because after we finish this call, her and I, we can talk further on, which we actually started before.
Take her to the Italian restaurant.
I'm just the luckiest person. And when I was introduced to Lama's work, just like you, I was just smitten by his words, by his compassion and passion. And when I found the Buddhist mission here in Hungary, and I met Vajra Mala, I just thought that this is the place, this is the Sangha for me. And so I would just leave it as it is, because I know that time is passing and we have students who would ask questions, and we have another time. So thank you very much for coming.
It was my pleasure.
And
yes, Vajra Mala, thank you so much.
It's a great way to start the new year with this book.
It was great to meet you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Maybe we'll circle back after the students have had a comment or two, and then we'll maybe get something additional from you. But let's turn first, Dave McQuarrie. Hi, Dave. Oh, and I see Ann Bering's with us. Ann, if you want to make a comment, would love to hear what you've got to say about all this. Hi, Dave.
I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yeah.
My question is partly one of curiosity. I'm delighted to have Lama Govinda's work being highlighted, and you know, as usual, your presentation was marvelous. My background, as you know, was that of a Gestalt therapist, and one of my major mentors was George Rossner in Toronto, who indicated that he knew Lama Govinda well and was a Shela of Lama Govinda. So I'm curious as to whether or not your venerable guest ever met him. But also just that what George emphasized for me was the compassion that was necessary in human development. As you probably know, Fritz Perls, who started Gestalt therapy, was noted for his lack of compassion. And what George brought into Gestalt therapy for me was this deep sense of compassion that allowed me to live into my own sense of compassion and to explore Buddhism, and you know, just a rich tradition that I'm thankful for. So as I say, my question is that of curiosity. Thank you.
Vajra Mala, do you want to make a comment?
I didn't know this person, but I know that Lama Govinda and Fritz Perls were closely connected. And I'm surprised that you think that Fritz Perls was not a compassionate man. I never met him personally. Lama Govinda was. So he was always asking people, what do you need? Can I do something for you? Have you traveled well? Are you hungry? So on a very basic level, he was a real guru. In Tibetan, a real Lama, because a Lama is a mother guru. And he behaved really like a mother, although he was a man, not a woman. And this compassion with beginners, with simple people, with everybody, that was the point which really made him a guru, not only a researcher or a philosopher or an artist or an author. Yeah. Thank you for this comment. It is the central point, what we have to keep in mind when we speak about Buddhism and a Buddhist path of transformation.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dave. Anne, would love to hear from you, and then Margot, and then Stefan. You're muted, Anne. There you go. There you go.
Can you hear now? Yeah. That book, first of all, I'd like to thank you both with the bottom of my heart, because this has been absolutely deeply moving to listen to you both and to feel the inspiration coming, I think, from Lama Govinda himself through you to all of us. And that book has been in my library since I came back from India in 1950, whatever it was, whenever the book was published. I've had it and I've read it years and years ago, but I haven't really entered into it in the way that you've described. And I feel I should have done that. But on the other hand, my whole life has been directed by the idea of finding the way to the infinite, at the same time keeping my feet on the ground in this world. And what you explained so brilliantly is the balance, not going too far in one direction or too far in the other, but keeping to the middle way and remembering all the time to develop compassion in whatever way one can, in whatever one's path of life is. So thank you both from the bottom of my heart. And thank you, Lama Govinda, for that book.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's about loving one another. That's how Govinda ends the work. Although his final image is of fearlessness. That to truly be compassionate in a complicated world, we need fearlessness in the face of the darkness. And I think that's a powerful image as well, and may refer back, Dave, to Fritz Perls. You know, I think having spent a number of years at Esalen, Fritz was known for his tough love. You know, he wanted, if you were going to do this, you got to do it. And sometimes that takes tough love. And so this notion of compassion is a very multi-layered phenomenon. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Anne. I'm delighted to hear you've had that book on your bookshelf. I'm not surprised. It's one of the great works. One of the great works. So there was Margot here. I don't know whether, yeah, Margot Borden, and then Stephen. Margot, welcome.
Hi, thanks. So, it's been a wonderful, inspiring talk so far. My question is, so I've learned very little bit of Buddhism in my life. I've done Vipassana retreat, then have often read the Dhammapada, but this book seems so detailed and highly technical. How would you advise a beginner to begin to penetrate into what it's trying to convey?
Oh boy, Vajra Mala, do you want to comment on that? You're a spiritual director, so you would be probably the first person to comment.
Yes, I think it's important to read it several times and to read it slowly and to meditate after every paragraph. So it is full of images. So let these images have an effect onto your soul. Develop your own images, as Jim did with the lotus, which he described. Don't only be restricted to the words, but merge with these images. And then the book will start to speak to you. And it is not really, although very scientific, but it is not really an intellectual book. It teaches you a lot of details, but these details are all important because they are like the different aspects of the completeness of the whole truth. You will find a few aspects in the beginning, but later when you repeat, you will discover other aspects. And then this image will grow like a mosaic. And that's a beautiful task to do.
Yeah, I would just say, Margot, in my own experience, you know, when I first read it, it was a very superficial read. I was struck by his explication of the mantra, of course, given my personal history of the mantra. And all it did in the first instance was legitimate that which I already knew to be true. That this mantra, the Om Mani Padme Hum, is a powerful mantra. And it was from reading Govinda in my late 20s that I began to be, first time in my life, to be disciplined about doing the mantra. And I began to experiment with it. And this was, you know, this is when the Maharishi was hitting the West in the 70s. And it was all about sitting there for 20 minutes and doing your mantra. And so I started to sit there for 20 minutes and do the Om Mani Padme Hum, right? And so that was all I got out of the book. And if for all of you, if all you get out of this book, even if you don't read it, but you start reflecting on the Om Mani Padme Hum, consider it as a mantra. It'll start to reverberate in your consciousness. And the extraordinary thing about mantras is what's so extraordinary about pilgrimages. You know, every year we go to Chartres, as you all know. When one makes a pilgrimage to Chartres, you are walking in the footsteps of thousands, millions in the case of Chartres, who have been there before. When you walk the labyrinth, everybody who's ever walked the labyrinth, every prayer, every yearning, every supplication for deliverance reverberates through you. So when you pick up a mantra like the Om Mani Padme Hum, you're picking up a tonality that has accumulated a depth of devotion and a depth of illumination over millennia. And when you consider further that this is the mantra of the Dalai Lama, given the Dalai Lama, and you begin to imbibe it in your own soul, even for 3 minutes a day, it will work within you. So don't worry about all the layers in the book. This is one reason why I try to read it once a year, because it's so rich and layered. Every year, different things jump out. And sometimes I think, how could I read this book 30 times and this is the first time I'm seeing this? How could I miss that? Well, it's because my maturational development was a little bit stunted. And I'm a roughly hewn man. It takes, you know, it's like, you know, I remember, Anne, your book on Dream of the Cosmos. I had to go through it really twice. It's a big book, or Cosmos and Psyche, or the Myth of the Goddess. There's some books out there that are like fine wine. You know, they improve with age. And so for the students in particular, don't think you have to master it. Just dip into it, because you're dipping into the ocean of eternity. Stephen? Is Stephen there?
People can see.
There he is.
start my video. Sorry.
Perfect. There you are. Hello, Stephen.
Hi. Thank you so much. Okay, so dipping into eternity. I have to say this was one of the most, or if not the most inspiring lectures, university lectures I've ever attended. So thank you so much. And I think it's really special what you have with Ubiquity. So my context is I've done a lot of Vipassana, and I've lived with the monks in Theravada monasteries. And I'm caught in this, at the moment, trying to decide if my narrative going into this is for the collective or as it is for myself as an individual. So I'm wondering if this is more of an inhale or an exhale going into this book, because I've not read it yet. And I'm wanting to know the approach going in. I know that it probably will reveal itself, but I feel like I'm going to go into this with some sort of feeling that I need to say something for others, or can I just have this be an investigation for myself? If that makes sense.
Sure. Thank you for that. Vajra Mala, do you want to comment on that? Does he inhale or exhale?
I think
that's a great metaphor, Stephen. Thank you.
We can't only inhale and we can't only exhale. You need both. And shamatha and vipassana is, so to say, the basis of all. So it is necessary to do it every day. We do it too. We don't start with tantric practices. But this mantra is so human, so connected to our basic needs that it can accompany your whole life. And perhaps I could recommend to the students the following procedure as a sort of approach to read something about the legend about Avalokiteshvara, about this very touching story when he gave up to work for the benefit of the beings. Yeah, perhaps you start with this legend, and then you can learn about his mantra, which can transform yourself. I think it is no difference in these traditions. Also in the Theravada tradition in in the southeast, you find these values. And the Buddha was teaching the bhavanas to develop compassion, to develop love. In Tantra, only the images are connecting you with a world beyond the human world. You are connected to enlightened beings who are still active and who can support you. So don't worry about any differences. Continue your anapanasati, your shamatha practice, your vipassana practice, and feel the presence of the Buddhas when reciting these mantras. But the recitation is much more powerful when you are aware of the deep meaning which is conveyed in this book.
Yeah, I thank you, Vajra Mala, for that. I think that's very sage advice. You know, I think you don't want to make the same mistake that Bill Clinton did, Stephen, when he said he didn't inhale? I think my advice is inhale as deeply as you can. and drink deeply of the well of Govinda, because the degree to which you can inhale in the spirit of Avalokiteshvara, when you exhale, you'll be that much wiser and more compassionate. But as Vajra Mala says, you know, it needs to be within the context of your existing practice. But I think since you're already immersed in Buddhism, what you'll find with, it's like, you know, walking across the floor and stepping on a trap door and just going down a story into this vast basement of treasure. That was the experience I had with Govinda. Everything else I read about Buddhism before was reshaped by my experience of his deep, both, I would say, intellectual acuity and emotional openness. I think that's what made Govinda Govinda. So that would be what I would counsel you, since you haven't started in on the book yet. And that brings us to a close. We'll carry on this discussion, going more deeply into Tantra, the chakras, and this notion of the Hum, the breath-breathing human beings next time. I would also say just a word about our upcoming summer courses on grammatica. We're doing, as you know, each year we do one of the 7 liberal arts in Chartres, and we're starting our 3rd cycle. We're concentrating on grammatica. And that's one reason why I chose the foundation of Tibetan mysticism, because that accentuates the power of the word. And grammatica is about the word. It's about how words shape and transform lives. And if there's 2 words that are universally potent right now in our world, one is trauma. We're all being traumatized, whether it's by Trump here in the United States, or Brexit, or financial instability, or by what's happening in the Middle East, climate change. Trauma is a common human experience right now. How do we understand trauma? How do we understand the connection between collective trauma and individual trauma? And then how do we, in the spirit of the Om Mani Padme Hum, how do we, in the spirit of the transmutation of the lead into gold, the lotus from the mud into the sunlight, how do we transform trauma into something that will empower us into what appears to be an ever deepening and darkening world? We're in some pretty deep waters right now, and how we come together in community, how we begin to breathe together, how we begin to explore the power of the words that we use with each other, is, in my mind, a critical aspect of whether those of us in the community of light, these 1,000 points of light that are around the planet, how do we conjoin our numinosity, our luminousness, in a way that can take the darkness in the spirit of Prigogine. The islands of coherence only emerge as they transmute the ocean of chaos. And that's one reason why I love Tibetan Buddhism, because it doesn't accentuate the ocean, it accentuates the drop. And each one of our little drops means something, and how we transmute it into something more true and more good and more beautiful is the task of our lifetimes. And that's why I so appreciate Ubiquity and the Wisdom School. We're a community that has this as our common purpose. So thank you, everyone. And Vajra Mala, thank you so much for gracing us. By the way, would you be willing to give us a short benediction, just a prayer as we end today?
In English, it's difficult for me. It's not my mother tongue, but I can
do it in German. Do it in German.
I will do it in English. Yeah.
Okay.
May all sentient beings who have been our mothers for many lifetimes, especially those who hate us or make hindrances for us, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they have joy, and may they meet all sentient beings with love and compassion, without aversion or clinging. May all sentient beings experience ultimate happiness and liberation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Blessings on us all. We'll see you next month. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.